darkest hour, the Lords of Waterdeep have issued a call for a hero. Someone who can face these dark elves and all their brethren in their own land. Someone who can defeat the hordes of the Underdark.
Let's talk about assassins in classical RPGs, and let's start with Neverwinter Nights.
This promises to be fun.
You may wonder, why the assassin? What's so special about it after all? Well, let's say there is always something interesting happening with this class. In some cases it performs really well despite the fact that general opinion suggests the opposite. In others, everyone believes it to be top DPS, while the reality is quite different. It often goes deeper into game mechanics than other classes, and occasionally uses things that no one else does to do what no one else could. And in general, despite having such a powerful name that suggests a certain level of expertise, the assassin very often shares the tragic fate of his victims, falling prey to the developer's hands.
Victims, aren't we all?
In the case of Neverwinter Nights, it's a bit of everything. A tragic fate, deep mechanics, a unique set of perks, and the general player consensus that the assassin is just a rogue who gets only half the skill points. Of course, the opposite stance also exists, but it is rare. So let's look into it. Assassin is a prestige class, and to unlock it you need only 8 points in the move silently and hide skills. This looks like a very mild condition that is very easy to fulfill. In practice, however, to make an effective build with this class you need a quite specific base, which of course we will discuss and which happens to be the real prerequisite. And also you need to be evil.
Good, bad, I'm the guy with a gun.
What Assassin provides is first the ability to use poison, which is in general not a big deal and mostly a roleplay ability, unless the developers of the model you are playing added some custom poisons that you would actually want to use. Then comes the upgrade of your sneak attacks into death attacks, as well as their progression, which is the main reason to take this class. It gives you a chance to paralyze an enemy that is not yet in combat, for 1 turn per assassin level, which is pretty much forever. The difficulty class is not particularly high, as it scales with assassin's level and intelligence modifier, which is not your prime stat. The saving throw is made on fortitude, so it's mages and rogues, not warriors, who are your prime targets. And by this point, everyone who reads the description of the ability comes to a quite logical conclusion. A single attempt to paralyze, since combat will begin immediately after, combined with a rather low difficulty class, is just trash and not worth the loss of rogue skill points. Thankfully, there are ways to increase both the probability and the number of attempts, and you really should use them. But first let's finish with the class description. Uncanny Dodge makes sure that you won't lose your dexterity bonus to armor class when flat-footed or when the enemy is invincible, and as such it is a core talent for any dex build, and by the way monks don't have it, this will be useful later. Apart from that, it provides a bonus to reflex saving throws against traps, which is quite handy in the first Neverwinter Nights, since traps here hit like a truck. Then there is a bonus to saving throws against poison. It doesn't look like much, as you can always use Amulet of Health to get immunity, and yet it's nice little boon, considering that the rogue class in general has a low fortitude save. Finally, Assassin gets a set of free spells. First is Ghostly Visage, which by the time you get it has already kinda lost its relevance. Then there is Darkness, which is the key spell for the Assassin, and lastly Invisibility and Improved Invisibility. All of these are spell-like abilities, and despite popular belief, Improved Invisibility can be dispelled, unfortunately. And yet, it has a better chance to survive than if it came from a scroll-through use magic device. And while these free spells are incredibly useful, you only get a single cast per day, which is simply not enough on its own. The last unmentioned benefit of the Assassin is that as a prestige class it doesn't apply experience penalty for multiclassing, and as such it can be used to get access to skills like Tumble and UMD. All through taking into account the move silently and hide skill requirements, most of the time this is not the case.
Run Run.
So this attack. The first thing to know is that you actually can reset an enemy combat status to net yourself another paralysis attempt. The most basic way to do it is simply to become invisible. It doesn't matter whether it is a potion, a scroll, or a class spell itself. Alternatively, you can just run away and hide again, a classic Baldur's Gate move. And while this could occasionally be helpful, potions and scrolls are limited in number, while running is not only tedious to do but also not always possible. The next option is the hide in plain sight feat from the Shadow Dancer, and the level of brokenness of this ability can only be rivaled by a devastating critical. Both feats are so overpowered that the game simply stops being fun, so while this is a good option, we won't use it. Besides, Hips is kinda a sin on its own. I mean, if you have it, this attack is not really needed, because at that point you simply don't care whether the enemy is paralyzed or not. And finally, the last one, the one that we actually will use, is Darkness.
Ordinary men fear the power of darkness. I revel in it.
Enemies in Darkness who don't directly fight you and don't possess True Sight or Ultra Vision will have their combat status reset in just a few seconds. While it a bit inconsistent, it allows you to theoretically paralyze every enemy in the room. And yes, Darkness is a double-edged sword, so you yourself will need a way to counter it. Blind Fight, Ultra Vision or True Sight. The latter two are obviously the better options and don't require wasting a feat. It's probably worth mentioning that Darkness itself is a very powerful spell, even without taking into account Assassin's Paralysis. It supplies a blind status, so enemies lose their dexterity modifier to armor class, they are considered flanked, so you get another +2 to attack, and every attack against them is a sneak attack. Enemies themselves get -4 to their attack rolls, miss half of their swings, and can't target you with ranged attacks or spells. They only defend themselves and don't act. Finally, you can use Darkness Cloud to restealth. So yeah, it's quite close in terms of power to Hips, but much more fair and doesn't break immersion, as there is a counterplay to it, and you are limited by spell slots. Unless of course you are playing a model which has infinite darkness spell item in it. Now let's return to the issue of low DC. From the description it may seem that your first single strike will bring a paralysis attempt, and that's not quite true. The thing is, attacks during a round in the first Neverwinter come in a form of 3 flurries. Don't confuse this with Monk's Flurry of Blows. And in fact, all attacks in the first flurry will try to paralyze the target. So, as there are 3 of them, it means you add an extra strike to your initial flurry for every 3 total attacks your character gets. So you will have 2 strikes at 4 attacks, 3 strikes at 7 and finally 4 strikes at 10. Technically, it can go up to 5 attacks per flurry, but you will not be able to reach this number. And yes, all normal attacks that you have count for this purpose. Main hand attacks, off-hand attacks, attacks from haste, from flurry of blows, etc. In general, it's actually a very good thing that the first Neverwinter uses this system instead of the terrible PnP rule where you can only make 1 attack if you move, that most of the other games use. Just believe me, it's so nice to have a 4-armed Mantis warrior with a potential of 16 attacks who in fact makes only 1 just because there is a water on the floor and he can't make a free 5-foot step. Also note that the order in which a character applies their strikes is first main hand, then bonus attacks that you get from haste and similar sources, and only then off-hand attacks. What this means for our purpose is that while you can have 4 paralysis attempts, they will be made with the main hand weapon and they will be subject to the interactive attack bonus penalty. You know, -5 or -3 for monks. So the attack bonus is also important. Here is a simple graph to visualize how additional attacks influence our resultant paralysis chance. It doesn't take into account the attack bonus penalties that the second and further attacks will have, so it illustrates perfect conditions, while in reality it will be more squished down. As you can see, if for example we have a base chance of 40%, in practice it will be closer to 60, as every assassin build will eventually have 2 strikes in the first flurry, and if you decide to specialize in it, you can squeeze 80 and more. So summarizing, we primarily have 2 big demands for our base class. It must be able to cast darkness, and it should provide as many attacks per round as possible, and as such it should have a good base attack bonus. And there isn't much of a choice, as only 4 classes can cast darkness: Bard, Cleric and Wizard Sorcerer. The first thing that comes to mind is Wizard. Since his prime stat is intelligence, there is a synergy with Death Attack, but unfortunately Wizard has a low buff growth, and as such our number of attacks will be terrible. And Tenzer's transformation also doesn't help, as here it turns us into a different creature with its own weapon. Bard is interesting, as he also has access to stealth skills and can fulfill assassin's requirements, and as such we are free to add any third class to our build. But if we talk in the format of the official campaigns or normal models with a level cap around level 20, we will simply have no free levels to waste. And Bard is already a hybrid caster, so if we mix him further, his spellcasting potential will be just too low. Besides, for Bard's Song to be useful, it also demands that he stays pure. Finally, Cleric, who will be our choice? It may seem that in this case our character will become too mad, as out of 6 stats we will need 5, but in practice we are not really interested in high-level Cleric spells, so 15 Wisdom is all that we need. And thanks to another custom Neverwinter Nights rule, stat boost effect from different sources stuck. This means any spellcaster pretty much automatically gives you +4 to all your prime stats. Except for dexterity, of course, as Cleric doesn't have Cat's Grace. It's possible to get it through Animal Domain, but it's really not the best choice if you start from level 1. And let's be honest, Cleric in the first Neverwinter is just an S++ class, and with him as a base, our assassin is simply doomed to succeed. Besides, his Divine Power spell will raise our base attack bonus to fighter's level, and as such give us the maximum possible amount of attacks. Finally, Cleric doesn't limit us in terms of what armor we can use, and also goes well in combination with Monk, who benefit from high wisdom. As for domains, Trickery and Strength are a top choice. They will grant you improved invisibility and stone skin, and while at higher levels we most likely will replace them with items or the same spell from Assassin itself, they will still be incredibly useful until we reach this point. But of course, if in your model you start with a high level character right away, feel free to replace Trickery. But not Strength, as its actual real benefit is access to Divine Power at level 3. This effectively doubles our uptime with this buff. Not only we can slot a standard version into our 3rd level spells, but we can also use Metamagic to run the extended version in our 4th level slots. With that settled, let's return a bit back to the class requirements, as we still need to fulfill them. We need just 1 level of a class with access to hide and move silently, and once again there is only a handful of suitable base classes for it: Bard, Ranger, Rogue and Monk. Bard doesn't really provide any special bonuses at just 1 level deep. Ranger could be interesting, as he effectively grants you 2 free feats at level 1, but there is one big problem with him. If you take Ranger, you will not be able to take Improved Weapon Fighting as a general feat anymore. So he's okay only in low level models. And besides, unlike Monk and Rogue, he doesn't provide one of the best feats in the entire game, which is Evasion. Monk grants it at level 1, while with Rogue you would need to take a 2nd level too.
It's all in the reflexes.
So both these classes are great as 1 or 2 level splashes, and which one you take is just determined by the type of build you are making. Monk is a very front-loaded, granting Cleave, bonus naked armor class, flurry of blows, and what is even more important, Monk attack progression with Kamas. You will get iterative attacks not every 5 buff, but 3, which means Monk will have 2 attacks more than a normal dual wield build. Rogue, on the other hand, looks quite pitiful, at least if you don't go into details, with just one die of sneak attack and the need to spend 2 levels instead of 1 to reach evasion. Here we must make a little break and discuss that in general the default, sort of classical rogue or assassin build in the minds of players is a dual wield dexterity based one.
Darkness, and the Maker shall guide their hand.
The reason for this is actually quite trivial. Rogue associated skills like Open Lock all scale with dexterity.
Amateurs.
But you know, unless you play some specific model where the creator intentionally made locks and traps immune to knock and find trap spells, which most of the time is not the case, using those two is better and faster ways that don't require skill points. So where I was? Yes, dexterity-based rogues deserve their bad reputation. At the moment they encounter a crit immune enemy, the DPS drops significantly. Most of the time rogues still can deal with it, especially if mixed with cleric who will add a flat unresistible damage through divine favor, and yet. But there is also the second type of build. Why go dexterity if you can go strength instead and pretty much have no cons at all? So returning to our rogue deep, his biggest advantage is the ability to build strength and use any type of weapon and armor. Monk with Camas will have a much higher amount of attacks, but he is forced to go naked, and as such dexterity is pretty much his only choice. It's not a problem in terms of defense, as with Use Magic Device you will wear mage robes and there are at least some really strong ones, like Isaac's Sequencer robe, but your offense will suffer. And it's just quite boring to first go with an adventure robe with damage resistance and then swap to your endgame version, all while not being able to use the majority of the items you find.
I have a feeling this could be your lucky day.
Besides, don't forget that Camas in all the classical campaigns don't have any particularly strong exemplars. What I mean, if we speak about Hotel, the best weapons and chants are the ones that Resolver cannot add. Vampiric regeneration, massive criticals and bonus damage against alignment groups, as it will stack with normal bonus elemental damage. And Camas don't have any of that. On the other hand, Rogue is free to use the strongest weapons, including double-bladed, which have their own benefit, as you would need to upgrade and buff only one weapon. By the way, the double axe that we get from Rogue in the Valiant Death campaign is a very solid choice, and probably one of the best weapons for classes like Bard who can improve it with great magic weapon spell. And of course Rogue is also free to use any armor he wants. Even the heavy ones with -8 skill penalty are not a problem in the case of Cloak with stealth bonuses. The last benefit of Rogue is that by taking him as your starting class, you immediately will get enough points to fully develop at least one additional skill. The final thing to discuss before we look at actual builds is initiative.
Pay attention, son. This is for your own good.
In general, it's a useless stat as the game is real-time, not turn-based, but Assassin is pretty much the only one that really wants to invest into it. First of all, high initiative allows us to paralyze enemies in the first turn without the need to always go into stealth, especially when we already have a haste item, so we are able to charge even distant enemies. The second place where it comes in handy is not really confirmed, so feel free to discard it as pure nonsense. When we reset combat mode with darkness and attack an enemy again, I believe initiative is used again. So if you fail it, there will be no paralysis, as the enemy will be considered already in combat. I'm not 100% sure about it myself, but overall experience with high initiative was much more smooth than without it. But then again, you can activate stealth mode standing in the darkness before attacking an enemy, and this way guarantees that you will act first. That's just more tedious. Anyway, your initiative roll is improved by dexterity modifier and perks. There are 4 of them: Blooded and Sack for +2 and Improved and Epic Initiative for +4 each. The latter two are a kind of golden standard and are recommended to be taken for any assassin. By the way, it is better to take Epic Initiative as Assassin's bonus feat at level 14, as his selection pool for bonus feats is not particularly wide. While Blooded and Sack are still desirable, they are simply too expensive for dual-wield builds, as you already need to take 3 feats for 2 weapon fighting style. So here are 3 types of our assassin build. Dual-wield dexterity build with Monk. This one will reach the highest amount of attacks and as such the highest chance to paralyze enemies. You get 8 attacks and 3 paralyze attempts in a normal situation, increasing to 10 attacks and 4 attempts when using Divine Power and Flurry of Blows. However, this build suffers from the typical downsides of dexterity-based rogue and is limited in weapon and armor selection. The next one is the Strength two-handed build, which is the most consistent of them all. It will reach only 2 paralyze attempts and it will take quite some time for it to get there, so it's not the best choice for low-level models, but in return it simply doesn't care about crit immunity and damage resistance of the enemies. It will chop a damage with its 30 points of damage resist in no time, while the previous one will only scratch it for 3 damage per strike, thereby giving the maker plenty of time to use his harm spells, effectively quadrupling his HP pool and turning the fight into a nightmare.
Why won't you die?
Damage reduction.
Son!
Note that martial weapon feat can be swapped for exotic weapon proficiency if you prefer using size, or the build can be transformed into a shield one with expertise in case of playing a more difficult model. Finally, the last variant is a general dual-wield strength build. It also can be transformed into a dex one if you prefer it, but I simply don't see much sense in it. This one stands somewhere in the middle of the previous two. It also has 2 paralyze attempts in a normal situation, but reaches it much earlier than the single weapon build does. And of course it can be pushed to 3 by pre-buffing Divine Power, which is quite handy. For the sake of this video I went with two-handed build. And it's incredibly powerful. You simply turn off the light and the heads start rolling. Also, Hoto is not the most representative campaign for Assassin. In the first chapter it goes quite well, but in the second one, when your damage starts to ramp up, you quite often simply one-shot enemies instead. And in the final chapter you can paralyze devils and demons without a problem, but there is not much need to do it, while enemies like trolls have such enormous fortitude saves that they fail only on a natural one. But in general, your approach as an assassin is to identify the most dangerous enemy in the encounter, preferably a mage, turn him off with paralyzes, and then without any rush deal with his minions. With Strength build you have enormous DPS against targets vulnerable to sneak attacks, while in the case of crit immune enemies you are basically reduced from Bane of the Living to the level of a standard warrior, which is not bad at all. Another small but important thing to mention about weapons is that apart from the usual stats like damage die, crit range and multiplier, there is one that is not listed in the description: weapon range. All three weapons are categorized as either ranged or melee. Every melee weapon actually has its own preferred attack distance. It is important for 2 main reasons. The first reason is the reach of abilities like Cleave and Whirling Attack. While this is rarely a factor for Cleave, as the next enemy is usually close enough anyway, it is crucial for Virulent. The radius directly translates to the number of enemies you will hit. A high range even allows you to hit enemies who stand in the second row and cannot reach you. And yes, if you didn't know, Virulent Attack in the first Neverwinter is actually a very good feat and much better than Cleave. It's all due to Neverwinter being pretty much a one-character game, so enemy HP pools are not as huge as in other games. But anyway, the second and for our purpose more important reason is attacks of opportunity. If you are not flat-footed and enemy with a shorter weapon approaches you, you will get a free attack on it. The vice versa is also true. So it's another reason why initiative comes in handy. In the case of Karmas, it will protect you from enemy attacks, while with something longer it will ensure you get free attacks yourself. So in the case of Size versus Greatsword, the latter is not only mathematically better in almost all situations, but also significantly longer. The same is kind of the reason why katanas are so bad compared to bastard swords. And yes, attack distance is determined by the main hand, so a combination of longsword plus short sword is as good as 2 longswords. Now let's quickly run through the most useful for us clerical spells. And yes, a big chunk of them we will eventually replace with items. Tier 1. Bless. Just +1 to attack. Quite useful in the early stages, and while in the late game you most likely will hit the +20 attack bonus cap under Divine Power, it's still worth using. Divine Favor. With 9 levels of Cleric it will provide +3 to attack and damage for 1 minute, which is not bad at all. Besides, this damage cannot be resisted, so it's quite a crucial spell for dual-wield monk. And of course protection from evil, an additional +2 to armor class and saves, along with immunity to a big chunk of mind effects that you encounter in any model. Second tier. Bull Strength, Endurance and Fog Scanning, +4 to all of our most important attributes. Then Darkness and Ultravision, obviously. And also it's worth mentioning Silence, as you can cast it on yourself and as such create an anti-magic zone around. Personally I don't find it useful, as you are the caster yourself. Tier 3. Darkfire. It's about an additional 7 points of fire damage, very helpful against chests in the early game and in general quite a solid damage bonus. But as it counts as on-hit effect, and there could be only one of them,
there can be only one.
Depending on your weapon, this spell may become useless. Dispel Magic. In general, we simply don't have enough caster levels to make it reliable, and yet you may find yourself in a situation when it will be your best weapon against enemies with damage reflection. Negative Energy Protection. It will make you immune to negative energy damage, which is very useful in fights against many undead foes, especially against one particular lich and his robe. Divine Power. Well, everyone knows this spell. It will not just turn you into a fighter of the same level, but in fact make you even stronger, because the additional attacks that you will get from the buff increase will come with the full attack bonus. And we will have tons of this spell, so we can use it in literally every encounter we need. Tier 4. Death Ward. Immunity to any death spells, but note that it doesn't grant you immunity to ability drain effects.
Shit happens.
Freedom of Movement. Immunity to all forms of paralysis, including the Assassin's one, and slow effects. And of course improved invisibility and stone skin, which we get from domains. Also don't forget that with Use Magic Device we literally have access to every spell in the game, but in general you will cover almost all even without it. As for skills, out of the grade 4 Tumble, Spellcraft, Use Magic Device and Taunt, we only lack Taunt, but taking into account all our cell buffs, it's not a big deal. By the way, if you are creating a character at a higher level from the start, delay taking the 9th cleric level to the last one, this way your spellcraft will be higher. Now about the biggest nemesis of this build.
Stars.
No, it's not immunity to paralysis, not high fortitude saves, not even undead or crit immune enemies. It is magical shields and bad RNG on equipment. Death Armor isn't a problem, as its damage is quite low, but Elemental Shield is already dangerous. And yet protection from fire is probably one of the most common, so it is very unlikely that you at least would not have Red Dragon armor for such occasions. While the caster under still Acid Sheath, in case you are not lucky with acid resistant runes, indeed a problem. Your best weapon against it will be the Spell Magic Scrolls, which are rather unreliable.
You have to have faith for that to work.
Or simply patience to wait until it wears down on its own. Alright, by now you should have at least 2 questions. Why the video has such a name, given that everything actually looks pretty good so far? And why the UI of the footage is kind of strange? Well, the answer to both questions is the same. It's not the enhanced edition version of Neverwinter Nights. The thing is, as I already mentioned in Baldur's Gate 1 video, Beamdogs are quite bad when it comes to their own content and straight up villains when it comes to messing with game's balance. In this particular case, for who knows what reason, in all their wisdom they nerfed Assassin so hard that it's literally a dead class now, and you can forget everything I said before.
That's all, folks.
Starting from patch 174, this attack indeed triggers a Paralyze attempt only once per round, no matter how many attacks you have in the first flurry. But that's not all. The duration was also nerfed hard. From 1 turn per assassin level, it dropped to 1d6 plus round per assassin level. And yes, darkness shenanigans are still there, but your chance to paralyze the target will always remain very low. At the same time, the duration is now very short, especially for low-level assassins. So even if you get lucky on enemy saving throw, there is no guarantee that he will not shrug it off after just 2 rounds. As a result, Assassin is still a very demanding and very specialized class, but there is no more reward for it. Just take Strength Rover, grab knockdown feats, and in Enhanced Edition it will simply be better. And the funniest thing is that Beamdog for the second time killed Assassin, and there is simply no logical reason to do it whatsoever. Because you know, even if you look from the standpoint of PvP, freedom of movement is a very easy to get effect that provides full immunity to death attacks paralyzes. And without this attack, Assassin's bonus spells and the ability to take great dexterity as bonus feats are simply not tempting enough to outweigh what the Rogue provides. 4 additional skill points, while not crucial, as you are anyway able to take all the powerful stuff, are still pleasant. Besides that, the Rogue gets 2 additional special feats in comparison. They are actually not that great, and yet. Crippling Strike is situational, as the enemy must not just be vulnerable to sneak attack, but also dangerous enough to overcome our layers of defense. However, it can be handy in more difficult models.
Who wants some, huh? Who's next?
Defensive role is kind of whatever, because if it comes to it, it's time to rethink your build. Also, it's a prerequisite to Epic Dodge in case you are interested. Improved Evasion is an incredible feat for low reflex characters, when they get it from equipment, but for rogue-like builds it's make very little difference in comparison to regular Evasion. Opportunist is kind of useful, as if you are going with a longer range weapon you will trigger free attacks, but those are already made with your full attack bonus. So this +2 in reality leads to a very slight overall DPS increase. Finally, Slippery Mind is another one that looks incredible on paper but is almost useless in practice. Not only thanks to the clerical base do we have decent will saves, but immunity to mind effects is easy to get in the first Neverwinter Nights. And the last benefit is that you can now add a different third class and get bonuses from it instead. Well, yeah. Assassin is quite strong and, what is even more important, a very fun class to play, and you now have all the knowledge to make it work. Although you will need to do it in the Diamond Edition and not the Enhanced one. And let's take a moment and congratulate Beamdogs, as probably only they could at first make a ton of quality improvements to give the game a second breath and then cross it all out by messing with game balance. So in the end, the original is still what you will play.
Minsk will be free! These bonds will not hold my wrath!